It was absolutely the hair on the back of your neck. It was the like, I've seen the show before, I've watched the badge cameras. I've seen you guys, deconstruct videos like that. And it's like this is that. And that was kind of a weird realization to have where it's like, no, this is the real deal. This is probably as bad as you think it is.
Hey gang, if you're listening to this right now, odds are you watch videos on the main channel and you've seen how important speed and accuracy are in a gunfight. That's why Active Self-Protection recommends the Range Tech Shot Timer. It's the lowest cost shot timer on the market that we're aware of, Bluetooth compatible with any Android or iOS device, more features than any other shot timer. You can store all your data on the cloud for free, native integration with Practice Score, and a visual light-based go signal. Visit them at rangetechtimer.com, rangetechtimer.com, and tell them your friends at the Active Self-Protection Podcast sent you. All right, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am your host, Mike Williver. I am your favorite former Fed. With us today, new friend of mine. His name is Christopher, or Chris Conn, depending on who you ask. He is from the great state of Texas. He is a EMS professional. I'll let him tell you more about that. And he was in a pretty, very random encounter. You've heard me say on the badge cams in the past, you start your shift in public service and you kind of have an idea how it might go, and then it goes a totally different way that you don't expect. And this is certainly one of those stories. Christopher, is it Chris or Christopher?
I go by Chris. I like that.
Chris, it is. Chris, thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate you reaching out to us, buddy.
Hey, man, thank you. I appreciate all the work you guys do.
Well, you are. You want to tell us where you're from roughly and what you do and where you do it?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Western Pennsylvania, actually, and I got my EMT basic out of high school after that. I did it with the intention of doing career fire department instead, which wasn't a very prominent career field in that area. But I wanted to, make myself a better candidate. Did it for about 3.5 years there, liked it the more I did it, moved to Houston. I was always told to say, I'm not from here, but I got here as quick as I could, right?
Right.
So I got hired at an agency down here, got my paramedic. Ended up liking it the more I did it. Same thing. I thought I was going to do fire. Ended up more EMS based. I've been here since 2016 and enjoyed it. And then within the last year, promoted to a supervisor position at a new agency here, northwest side of Harris County. We cover about 700,000 people on 170 square miles.
And how long have you been doing this in Texas?
In Texas since 2016.
Very cool. Yeah, you mentioned I got here as fast as I could. That's definitely a Texas thing. Have you heard the Lyle Lovett song? That's right, you're not from Texas.
Probably not enough to recite it, but yes.
Okay,
yes,
yeah.
Everybody always says, we'll still be friends. You can be from Pennsylvania, but we'll still be friends.
Western Pennsylvania. I'm from the DC area, and my part of my family's up in kind of central, northwest central Maryland, so not too far from there. So it's funny you don't have the Pittsburgh accent, so that's a plus because
the yins never stuck with me.
Yeah. That's good stuff. All right, so if you're from that area, you'll understand that reference. If you're not, then no problem. Go watch Mayor of Easttown on HBO, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. All right, so we've established you are a EMS professional. You've been doing this for a long time. On the other end of things, we're a self-defense related channel and podcast. Prior to this going down, this very bizarre incident going down with you, had you had any interest in self-defense? Something you think about very often? I know being in your field, you get to see the police side of things a lot, and so you're exposed to it. Is that something you gave a lot of thought to prior to this?
I think it's been a good mix, honestly. I've always been interested in the law enforcement field, never done anything with it, always kind of wondered what the opportunities would be there to kind of combine it, right? I've got a little bit of fire, I've got EMS, and of course, to complete the trifecta, there's some component of law enforcement that I think is probably hovering out there for me. I've always watched your guys' videos, loved all the badge cameras. At the old agency I worked for, we actually had body cameras as paramedics, which was really great to get to watch back just from the training component alone. So I've always been interested in that. I am an active carrier. I enjoy shooting recreationally. So I feel like there's a good blend of all that information. It always feels pertinent, right? We operate in the field, like you said, alongside law enforcement. It's a different role, but I feel like there's enough exposure to these type of circumstances that it's been beneficial before 2 weeks ago. And then since the incident, I feel like that just kind of solidified my interest in those type things because it's a very applicable skill, the body language, the positioning, things like that.
So I assume that your agency probably doesn't allow you to carry a firearm on you when you're on duty. I'm just going to throw that out there. Is that the case?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. I think that we're loosening up, thank God, finally, all the CCW regulations across the country. I think it might be something worth visiting at some point. I know there's such a thing as tactical paramedics that work with SWAT teams. That's a pretty cool job. Those guys are usually unarmed. I think it's worth probably investigating in the not too distant future the possibility that we perhaps move towards getting at least one person on a rig who is either carrying or has access to a firearm, or at least less lethal or something like that, in the case you find yourself out there dealing with a combative patient or with someone who is suicidal or whatever, and you don't have the luxury of getting out of there and waiting for the cops, or the cops are too far away or something like that. I think it's something we should start talking about, don't you?
Yeah, I think I think the conversation's there, right? I know it's a delicate role, being there to help and not to risk harming, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I can't help but wonder if it's just an uptick in crime. You know, Harris County is popularized for some of the bail reform and things like that, right? A lot of repeat offenders. So it feels like it's really easy to say that things are going downhill fast. I don't want to get caught up in that
Right.
and sensationalize it, but also, I mean, again, I've carried in my own life for as many years as I can now, right? I bought a gun before I bought alcohol on my 21st birthday. So yeah, I think I can't help but wonder that there's some sort of a niche role to fill there. I know you spoke about like the tactical paramedic stuff. I think those programs are great, and being able to carry on the job, I I would enjoy it in the way of knowing that you've got some sort of last ditch in the event you get put in a 1 in a million situation and can't get out. You know, and I got to give kudos to Harris County Sheriff's Office and the Precinct 4 constables that operate in this area. I mean, they're on it. They're always having our back. I've developed a good working relationship with them over the years. But fact of the matter is, this just happened to be that 1 in a million time where you don't have somebody with you.
Right. And I mean, I say it half jokingly frequently on the channel when I introduce a video that it's from Houston, Harris County area. But jokes aside, there is a lot of, it seems to me like an inordinate amount of criminal activity that goes on around there, which is a shame because Texas is a lovely place. But man, Houston has kept us afloat as far as content goes for a while. I can't remember a 2 week period where I didn't have at least one Houston related video for better or worse. So walk us through the day in question. You were at work. You were on duty. I think you said you were in a marked vehicle, not an ambulance, I believe. So just walk us through what you were assigned to that day, what you were doing, where you were going, and then we'll start talking about what happened.
Yeah, so I just left one call at the hospital. I kind of sat with the crew and we debriefed the call for a little while. It's about 3:45 in the morning, give or take. And if you're from Texas or appreciate good food, you know that Whataburger is far superior to In-N-Out. So
Oh
I
boy!
was on
All
my way
right,
to get some Whataburger.
all right, Chris. We're gonna need to stop right there. Okay. Anyway, folks, that's
Yeah,
been
you
the
know
show.
what?
Thanks so much for tuning in. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so on my way to get some Whataburger, which I think is the perfectly appropriate meal at 3:45 in the morning in Texas. So I was going down. It's a 5-lane road with a center turn, and what I would otherwise consider a really pretty nice part of town. There's some high-end doctors' offices nearby. There's a Chick-fil-A next to a Starbucks, next to Handel's Ice Cream, all in the same couple hundred feet there. So I've got not an immediate suspicion for danger, right?
Hmm.
Going down the road, and there appeared to be a silver sedan, like a luxury model sedan too, half in a lane of traffic, half in a kind of a grassy ditch, going the other direction. It looked like the occupant was trying to push it down the road. So kind of not the best area, kind of dimly lit. I made a decision to turn around, cognizant of everything, and see if there was help that was needed, what I could do to, try and help out somebody in the community, right? So I had approached the vehicle. I put the takedown lights on, and I tried to be aware, right? I left the window halfway up. I left the doors locked. I left the vehicle in gear. I tried to stay about a lane width away, just kind of good operating tactics, I guess you could probably call that.
Sure. So let's just paint the picture real quick for the folks listening. So
Sure.
what kind of vehicle are you in? Are you in an ambulance or something else? And are you by yourself or is there people with you?
Yeah, so I am by myself. It's a very well marked SUV. It's got the company logo on the side,
Hmm.
uh, and I had a brief interaction with the guy actually too, which kind of parallels that. And I pulled up and I said, "Hey, do you need help?" And without hesitation, he said, "Yes, yeah, I'll take the help." I said, "Great. What kind of help do you need? Do you need me to call somebody? Do you want me to help push it off the road?" and he started looking around kind of up and down the street, which, okay, wasn't really concerning. And he said, well, who are you? And he starts looking at the car, right? So again, this is a marked vehicle with a light bar on top, all the markings. And I said, hey, I'm just, your friendly neighborhood paramedic, kind of making light of it. And he kept looking up and down the road and said, you know what, I'm good. I don't need the help right now. I appreciate it. I'm good. I don't need the help. So I said, okay. I put it in reverse and I said, I'll just sit behind you for the time being. I don't want somebody to come along and hit you because you're still in part of a moving lane of traffic. It's not a super well lit area. There's a subdivision nearby that's pretty nice. Kind of expected just to help push him off the road there.
So at
So
this
as I put
moment
the
when
car,
he's you're saying, hey, do you need help? And he's like, yeah, I'll take the help. And then all of a sudden his demeanor changes. Did that throw up any red flags for you? Were you thinking this is odd? This person doesn't seem to be completely all there, or were you just like, okay, whatever, I'll just sit here and block traffic?
yeah, I think you're I call it even a normalcy bias, but let's be honest, it's 3 something in the morning, in a quasi residential area, and he starts acting kind of shifty. I anticipate he's either got something going on in the car, or maybe is intoxicated to some degree and just doesn't want any sort of uniformed presence involvement. And then that's fair, right? I figured at that point, all right, the most I'm going to do is end up sitting behind you and just making sure nobody hits you. We'll put a call into law enforcement for disabled vehicle, and maybe now somebody that's acting atypical, but I had no signs of danger at that point.
Interesting. So you park up behind the guy. You have I assume you have a directional amber light directional arrow and some red and blues or reds or blues, whatever it is in Texas. You light that stuff up just to give people the idea, okay, there's something here. I need to slow down and pay attention and not hit him. And about how far away are you from him when you park the rig back there?
So I ended up backing up about 100, 150 feet behind him. The interesting part was too, with that demeanor change, when he had instantly gone to, no, I don't need the help. I don't need the help. He went to sit back down in the car. So I put in reverse, and it looked like he started digging around underneath the seat. And I thought, I don't get a great feeling about that. So I started to let off the brake and I went to press the gas. And he actually came out of the car and took one kind of like just one big step and lunged at the car. And you could see he was really fixated on the handle, which again, the door was still locked, the window was halfway up, and I was already starting to go in motion at that point. So it just seemed I couldn't really get a good read on what the intent was following that. But for the time being, I felt like that was a pretty directed, pretty intentional and deliberate act to try and grab the handle there. Again, who knows what would happen after, but I was already reversing, right? So at that point, certainly atypical, certainly at least an arm's distance threat. So that's what caused me to back up as far as I did. I left the takedown lights on. I had the rear facing lights on, but not the front facing, figuring, you know what, let's not spook this guy anymore. We'll just kind of let him do his thing. We'll be back here. I put a call in over the radio to our dispatch, and they called law enforcement at that point. So we were putting things in motion, but I did back up, like you said, about 150 feet. I left the takedown lights on, and the arrow stick was on. And I felt like at that point, it was a safe distance from any perceived threat I had. If he started running at me, I could have brewed a coffee before he made it back there.
Right.
But also having that presence, one, serves a good tangible benefit of making sure nobody still hits his car. But two, with kind of that weird behavior, at least if somebody else, Johnny citizen stops by and wants to offer help, they're made aware that whatever it is that's happening is being taken care of to some degree, right? Because now that he's acted shifty, I don't want somebody else to end up pulling up and him do something askew with them. So yeah, I sat about 150 feet back for probably 7 or 8 minutes before anything changed. He just kind of spent some time. He'd open 2 car doors. He'd open the hood. He'd close the car doors. He'd close the hood. He'd open the trunk. He'd close the trunk. It almost looked like, I'm sure you can relate to it in your law enforcement experience, kind of, and anybody else in the EMS field, kind of that drunk person that's looking for the keys that are probably in their hands. You're
Right.
doing things, but I don't feel like you're accomplishing a goal. You're productive. It's purposeful movement, but it's not. I don't feel like we're getting anywhere with this. It's just kind of busy work.
Yeah, what you're describing to me sounds very methy behavior, like just busy work. Just I'm gonna
That's fair.
like the guy who's taking apart his 10 speed and has it laying on the sidewalk like an exploded diagram with every nut and bolt in its place for no reason that anyone can discern other than this person.
Yeah. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but look, I'm proud of this. Look what I did.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that more than once. Okay, so now at this point, are you still thinking, this guy's just odd, or are you starting to get a little nervous?
It was pretty status quo for the whole time. Again, I don't know if the right word is irrational or abnormal. Just he's just doing things, right? So at this point, there's a pretty it's a consistent inconsistency, right? There's a pattern to what he's doing. It seems to be opening and closing doors. At one point, he pulls out like a storage tote, puts it on the ground, puts it back in the car, but it's still just the same repetitive pattern of opening and closing things. Doesn't look like he's really working towards something, and he looks pretty empty-handed during the most of this because I try to be cognizant of that.
So at this point, the sheriff's department is aware that this is going on. They're on their way, but you don't know that they're necessarily in a hurry to get there because all they know is a sort of a stranded motorist kind of in the lane of traffic. So it's not a priority call for them, but you know they're at least aware that you are there out with this guy. Um, Walk us through what happened next in your own words, because when you described it to me earlier, it would seem so crazy that again, one of those things, you start your shift and you're probably thinking, oh, we'll probably have a heart attack or two, maybe a car accident, maybe a pregnant lady, cat stuck in a tree. This isn't the sort
Yeah.
of thing you're expecting to have happen, but it did. So walk us through what happens in that moment.
Yeah, so the pattern continued, like I said, probably 7 or 8 minutes, and then over the course of what I can best reasonably articulate without the time warp effect and everything, I tried to do like a dry run of what I observed at the time, and I think, in all honesty, it comes out to about 7 or 8 seconds is the recognition time from this is weird to this is bad is all that we had to kind of work with, right? So he had that same repetitive behavior, same pattern, and then without any sort of provocation, nobody stopped. I didn't change anything that I was doing. He took a crouched position in the front passenger corner of his vehicle. So, like you said, to set the scene, he's about 100, 150 feet in front of me. I'm staggered off about half a lane because he's half off the road. So I'm taking as much of the right lane as I can to push traffic out and around and kind of give him that safety buffer there. So we're a little bit diagonal offset, but not by a lot. But then he disappears from view in a very deliberate way, and he crouches in front of his vehicle, like by the passenger side headlight, right? So I still had the vehicle in drive, anticipating if he comes back towards me, I'm just going to leave, right? I don't have any commitment at that point. There's no sense in me trying to intervene further than that and put myself at potential harm.
Yeah, agreed.
So he crouched down there, and I had the takedown lights on, so I could kind of see that a little bit better at least. And he pokes his head out to the side, and he pokes his head up to the top in a very kind of abrupt. It just felt reminiscent of some of the combat footage you see overseas, right? Almost like the Taliban shuffle or something, right? It's like, why are you poking your head out? Why is this different? This is very different. You went from almost nonsense to very deliberate, almost like a fighting posture there, right?
So you recognize this. Is there an alarm bell for you at this point?
Oh yeah, no, I mean it was absolutely the hair on the back of your neck. It was the like, I kind of after the fact made the goofy like I've seen the show before. I've watched the badge cameras. I've seen you guys, deconstruct videos like that, and it's like this is that. And that was kind of a weird realization to have, where it's like, no, this is the real deal. This is probably as bad as you think it is. So I switched from drive into reverse again, thinking that he's just taking this posture. And I still wanted to keep as much of a line of sight as I could on him for as long as I could. So I popped in reverse. I checked behind me. There's nobody there. So I started reversing down the road. And as I took my foot off the brake and put it on the gas, he came up in I'll describe it as best I can, right? He came up in a completely upright, erect stance, right? Because before he was just poking his head out, kind of in a crouch, like a low ready. This time he came up and took a very deliberate side step out to the passenger side of his vehicle. His feet were shoulder width apart, and I saw his hands come together and press forward. So although I can't see the tangible gun, this has all the hallmarks of presenting a firearm, right? You talk about those deliberate movements that sometimes officers and other concealed carriers will react to deliberately, because that is either the idea that they're trying to create a threat or that there is actually a threat, right? So he ducked right back down. I mean, I'm telling you, that took probably half a second that he presented himself for. So in that time, I'm already pressing the gas to go backwards. And in another half second, he pops back up, brings his hands together again. I see a laser come on, and I just thought, you son of a gun. And it was not that's a scared feeling. It wasn't the oh no feeling. I was just mad. Like, I cannot believe this is happening. I just wanted Whataburger, right? So as soon as I see the laser come on, within a second, he starts popping rounds off. He fired what I estimated was 6, which ended up being 6. I heard a couple of them hit the vehicle as I was reversing. Feels real good to press the gas all the way down, go in reverse, but then you realize you're not really going that fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of popped a J turn, threw it in drive, and then took off to the west at that point. Yeah, super. Again, from the time that the first shot broke back to the recognition of the changed behavior, I mean, 7 or 8 seconds, honest to God.
Let's talk about how important that is, by the way. As you know, I'm sure the audience is almost sick of me mentioning that in her women's self-defense classes, our CEO, Stephanie Widener, likes to say that if you get a red flag in any situation, it doesn't have to be the bizarre situation you found yourself in, but if you're, a woman at a restaurant and some guy's paying too much attention to you, or if you're, as I like to say, if you're a kid in a high school and you hear loud bangs going off in the hallway, that's not fireworks. That's someone shooting up your school, and you need to realize that as quickly as you can and accept it and act appropriately. So radically and rapidly accept reality, because if we don't radically and rapidly accept reality, we are wasting precious seconds between the time we recognize something is wrong and the time that we act to protect ourselves and others. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here, Chris, and say that the fact that you realized, okay, his behavior has changed, I need to act now, and you started to get the heck out of there. We don't know whether or not the extra 13 yards that you backed up in that time made a difference or not, but it might have, and it certainly didn't hurt to gain that distance between you and him. You may have said this and I missed it. Did any of those rounds strike the vehicle, and where did they strike the vehicle?
Yeah, so I heard them hitting. I heard kind of different tones to them, right? So I knew they're hitting different areas. Once we got down the block, quite a safe distance this time. And of course, in the process of all this, I went out, shots fired over the radio. They called law enforcement and had them expedite. Once I was able to park in a safe location, we found one that hit near the fog light, which ended up, it was a slow leak, but it took out the passenger side front tire. I actually have that bullet with me now. And then another one skipped off. That we have brush guards on our vehicle. So it skipped off basically the push bumper, and then skipped across the hood and landed somewhere. So, I mean, 2 out of 6 at a moving target at 150 feet, I feel like is pretty reasonable accuracy. I'm happy if I can hit paper at 50 yards.
Yeah, you're talking about when you say 100, 150 feet, that's what? Somewhere between 35 and 50 yards, something like that. I mean, an SUV is a pretty big target. If he's just shooting for the truck, you'd probably be able to hit that. Can I just mention one other thing? You said, and it's so important to me, you said, I just wanted Whataburger. That went through your mind. I don't think you were kidding. That went through your mind in that moment. I was this close to the drive-thru. I just wanted to get a relatively okay, probably lukewarm second-rate hamburger, because we don't have In-N-Out here. I understand. And in that moment, you were just like, man, why? Why are we doing this? I just stopped. I'm sure you're thinking something like that. I just wanted to give you a hand, and now you're shooting at me. And this is another thing I try to stress to people when I'm discussing self-defense. You can't apply common sense or rationality or logic to these situations. People's not, well, I don't know if he was drunk, high, mentally ill, whatever, but this guy isn't thinking the way you think. And I think part of the hesitation on people's part frequently when they're faced with a situation like this is, wait, huh? This isn't normal behavior. And that taking too much time thinking about why is this person doing this is another way to get yourself killed, frankly. So I'm glad that you didn't spend a lot of time worrying about the Whataburger and decided to get the heck out of there.
Oh yeah, and we talk about I think when we first got in touch, I talked about like the cognitive process being sped up there, right? And I feel like in some regards, that's one of those transferable skills between law enforcement and EMS, right? Like this situation is bad until I can prove that it's not, right? And I think in the EMS world, it's healthy to take the same approach, right? No matter what you're called out for,
Can't
no
hurt.
matter what you think it is, this patient is sick and is going to die until you can prove that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a lot better to operate in that perspective rather than, you can talk yourself out of, you can rationalize it, right? Well, this patient's blood pressure might normally be low, or, well, they might normally suffer this, or no, we don't know what the normal is, so maybe this isn't so bad, right? And I can only imagine similar things happen with law enforcement, right? So having that mindset of, no, this is bad. I have every reason to think this is bad. Let me treat this like this is bad. I think sped up that process, right? And I really do attribute a lot of that recognition to the videos that you guys put out in the content, because, like I said, it wasn't a metaphor when I said, I feel like I've seen the show before.
Mm-hmm.
As much as it is, it's also a very literal sense of no. I mean, what good comes from somebody crouching down and poking their head out at 4 o'clock in the morning and then coming up with their hands pressed together and feet shoulder width apart? Because I've never seen a good ending to that
Hmm.
one. So being able to speed up that recognition process was huge. And like you said, maybe the third round would have hit if I was a half a second slower. Who knows? But either way, no harm came from that earlier recognition and being able to make decisive moves from that.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm so glad you said that because I'm a big fan of getting in mental reps. Mental reps can come in different forms. One of them is you watch a video like one on our channel or some other channels that are out there, other sources that are out there that walk you through these sort of self-defense critical incident encounters, and you get a mental rep about something that will probably never happen to you. But if it does, if you do find yourself in a position to be in one of the situations that we cover, well, now as you said, I've already seen this movie. I've seen the preview at least of this movie, and I know how it ends. So maybe I can amend that outcome by acting in this certain way. And you know, for a paramedic or a police officer, the mental rep might be just we have some downtime. I'm going to think about if this, then what? If this happens, what would I do, and how would I do it? And visualize yourself doing that. Some people think that's silly or a waste of time, and I'm telling you right now, a mental rep is something that's free. It's easy. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it will help you down the road. We had a guy on this past week, a new friend of mine, Tim Rodifer, and Tim was an auto shop owner and or manager, and he had a someone walk up to a customer car where he left some tools and a diagnostic tool that he just bought, and the keys were in it. But he's in a shop that's off the main road. It's not like people don't wander into the parking lot normally. This guy jumps into the truck, turns it on. Tim, in the moment he sees this, is thinking, "Oh, this guy's stealing my new $20,000 diagnostic tool." So he goes running over there to keep him from stealing it. And just as Tim gets to the pickup truck, this guy closes the door, turns it on, and Tim ends up, without having time to really think about it, jumping through the open window, ends up getting dragged through the parking lot. And I think some people might be like, "Well, what's the point in that? What good is that? What am I going to learn from this?" What you're going to get is a mental rep, where you're seeing a thing happen that could potentially happen to you, and you get to think about that situation. And if it happens to you, it's not the first time you've seen it. Does that make sense, Chris?
Oh, 100%. And I would credit a lot of that success and a lot in general, truthfully, to those. I had a mentor before that was huge on that, right? And that was some of the ability to watch film back, in our case, the body cameras from the EMS perspective. When you look at, these successful sports teams, they do the same thing. It's no different than our career field in public safety, where, we don't run many pediatric cardiac arrests, knock on wood, right? So the opportunity to watch the body camera of 10 pediatric cardiac arrests in an hour and get to learn a little bit from each of those is huge, right?
Sure.
Being able to watch your videos and see certain things in the concealed carry side of the world go down have absolutely been reminiscent in daily life, where it's like, oh, maybe we'll think about this should something go down, God forbid. But having that extra layer of preparation, and like I said, I tried to be cognizant of that, and I left the vehicle and drive at the time. And at least tried to have some sort of plan there should something go sideways. Granted, I did not think it was going to be shots getting lobbed my way by any stretch of the imagination. But, I never got, I get like the tappy foot when you get stressed out or your adrenaline starts going, right? I don't think I ever got that feeling. I don't feel like I ever had that, I don't want to die. I never had that, oh, please don't shoot me. I never had that, like, I've got to get out of this alive. It was just kind of actions that were already partially pre-planned. I don't know if that's the right way to put that, but it felt like it was a deliberate action to that. I don't feel like I got wrapped around the axle with the emotional side of it, at least at the time, and tried to worry about that too much. It was just, this is bad. This is very bad. And then it actually got bad. And just how do we make this less bad for us?
Yeah, let's figure out a way to make this suck a little less than it does, because it is a poop sandwich for sure. So the police are already on their way. Harris County Sheriffs. How long does it take them to get there, and where are you? Are you way down the road at this point, or did you wait around the corner, or how did you handle that? And what happened when the police showed up?
Yeah, so thankfully, I and then the ambulance that ended up staging for this call got over half a mile down the road. And there's luckily a good bend in the road too. So we were well out of the line of sight, and we were well down the road where this would not have been an issue anymore, right? So that's where we checked the vehicle and whatnot. I mean, I'm telling you, kudos to them, because I know that they were probably already headed that way in a much less robust capacity.
Hmm.
But I mean, I was barely getting out of the car to assess everything, and they came screaming by. I mean, no less than a dozen, and they do a great job. They actually dropped it as an officer assist when we have basically our Mayday situation gets coded to them as, hey, this is EMS, but this is treated like an officer down response. So I mean, you had several agencies send pretty much everybody that was available. So much so that there was one of our crews didn't hear the radio traffic and wasn't aware of what had just happened. And he actually texted me and said, hey, did we just drop like a really hot call in the area? Because we just had like a dozen cruisers fly by us. I said, yeah, I just got shot at.
Yeah, kind
Like,
of.
wow, no kidding, But it was cool to me, in kind of that outside perspective, that was such a significant response from law enforcement that it raised questions and I guess kind of red flags to our crew members that had no idea something went on, but that was significant enough for them to recognize that. And like, what a show of support, man. Holy cow, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. But yes, I mean, there was no shortage, probably 2 dozen. There were off-duty officers. There were officers working extra jobs that came by. I mean, it was a flood of law enforcement within the first 3 minutes. I think it just didn't stop. So they all went to the scene originally and detained the guy. And then again, within 2 minutes, there were probably 6 officers where we were down the street, making sure that we were okay and trying to coordinate the rest of the response with everything. So huge hat tip to them.
Yeah, it's nice to hear. Law enforcement got a huge blow to our credibility with what happened down in Uvalde not long ago. And the ponderous and inexplicable and disgraceful actions. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the way that was responded to was wholly inappropriate and wrong and shameful. And so yeah, I like to highlight when Ellie does a good job. And that leads me to another point real quick, which is that, we hear some states have a thing called assault on a protected person. And what that usually refers to is a judge, a DA, a paramedic, a cop, a teacher, a public official of some sort. And some people that phraseology rubs them the wrong way. And I don't blame them. I don't love the way that's phrased, but the idea is it's a different sort of charge when someone assaults a public official. And I think the reason that that's different, although not more important than anyone else being assaulted, and it shouldn't necessarily be considered any different. But the difference is, in my mind, is if you assault a police officer, if you assault a paramedic, there's nothing you won't do. You are assaulting a representative of the community. You're assaulting the whole community, in my opinion, when you attempt to injure or kill a fireman or a teacher or a judge or a police officer, because this person represents the whole community or the whole county or state, depending on their position. So there is a difference, although I don't think that assault is any more important than an assault on anyone else. I just kind of wanted to talk through that because there was some very unhappy comments when John had mentioned that was a charge that was given to someone who had assaulted, I think, a police officer in one of our videos. So when the sheriffs get there, I know you don't have a first person view of this, but did they catch the guy? What ended up happening?
Yeah, so they did. And just to parallel what you're saying there, yeah, I believe the charge, the verbiage at least, is whatever the classification of assault with a deadly weapon on a public servant. And even with the recognition, I stopped and had the brief exchange with words with the guy, and like you said, a representative of the community there. I even made the lighthearted joke, but just friendly neighborhood paramedic, because
Right.
at that point, yes, traditionally EMS does not respond to disabled vehicles or somebody stopped on the side of the road. But at that point in time, you are a member of the community, whether that's by way of residency or visiting the community, and what appears to be a state of need. So it only makes sense to me to try and provide some sort of remedy to whatever that situation is. But you've got the recognition that it's no better shoot at a cop, don't get me wrong, but an unarmed paramedic at a sitting duck down the road, like, bro, why are we doing this right now? So yes, the first 2 deputies arrive. He was non-compliant, but not combative either. My understanding was he was taken down to the ground and handcuffed without much incident there. They ended up finding several loaded handgun magazines in the same position that he was, crouched down in front of the vehicle where he took the shooting stance at me. And then they also found some assorted weapons between his home. And I believe the news said that there was a semi-automatic shotgun or some sort of a rifle in the vehicle also. So as the details came out, it was discovered that he himself had placed a call to law enforcement for basically a welfare check, right? I don't know the verbiage of how that went, but he had called on himself and said, "Hey, somebody's broken down, or could you check by on me?" So with the way that the vehicle was arranged, the 100% conviction is that he was setting up to actually ambush a deputy and, I mean, assassinate one, right? But I ended up, just by the timing, kind of rolling up before he could get set up and in place with everything. So that has a little bit of an eerie feeling to it. I'm super happy that everything went the way it did, all things considered, because I think a single deputy rolling up on a disabled vehicle sadly would have been a sitting duck for an attack like that.
Yeah, we cover a lot of these. Unfortunately, the people tend to refer to it as suicide by cop. I don't have a better explanation for it, but I wonder if maybe this is what he was trying to do. Was you pulled up and he saw lights and he's like, yeah, give me a hand. Either hoping to assassinate a law enforcement officer or force one to shoot him and kill him. That's another possibility. I don't know what was in this guy's mind.
Sure, sure. And hindsight being 2020, once I identified myself as a paramedic and he started looking around, it almost was reminiscent of somebody being thrown off track, right? Because he started looking around like
Right.
there was an answer written on the pavement somewhere. So putting these all together after the fact makes sense that, if his deliberate plan was to ambush an officer, now you've got a uniform presence in a marked vehicle. That's not your plan. And you don't have the opportunity at this point to instigate something. So maybe that's why he lunged at the car, right? Maybe that's why he took a couple minutes to collect his thoughts or whatever he was doing by doing laps around the vehicle, deciding whether, at this point, I don't know any better. I'm sitting back at that point, a sitting duck for whatever. So maybe he decided, what, there aren't any cops here yet. So let me go ahead and do what I can with this, SUV that's sitting down the road.
Sure.
And much like you said too, there was no sort of altercation when he was arrested with a deputy. So that makes me think back to a lot of the active shooters that whenever they're challenged by some amount of authority or some amount of just force, oftentimes end up going off and taking their own life.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you were prepared for the ambush, but not the actual fight. So when the fight came to you, you had nothing to do at that point.
So, we do these podcasts and we do the main channel videos to learn lessons. So this was your incident. Looking back on it now, is there something that you've had some time to think about it that you might have done differently, or you would advise someone else if they find themselves in this extremely unlikely set of circumstances that they would do differently than what you did? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it'd be real easy to say, I just wish it never happened, or I wish I wouldn't have stopped. But I mean, I don't want to live life that way where now you're afraid to help somebody who's broke down on the side of the road, right? I think it's important to acknowledge that, yes, the possibility exists. You kind of look at we weigh the scales of probable versus possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that every disabled vehicle you come upon is going to have somebody waiting to kill you? It's possible. It's not probable.
Right.
I don't think statistically that every vehicle that's broken down on the side of the road is going to try and maim you, but I think it's important to recognize that the possibility exists. So I think it's almost a comfort that I was able to respond that way, and have that cognitive process go as quickly as it did, and just trust your gut with that. I got a weird feeling when he lunged at the car originally and started acting kind of just almost erratic. I had a brief thought of like, man, I wish I could like text one of the cops on duty and just say, hey, I don't know if you're coming to this call, but I just get a weird feeling about this because it's just different, and it's not good different either, right? Again, I didn't know that this was ever going to instigate to something like that. However, it was just different, and part of that's probably my own role, not dealing with these type situations often. But yeah, just trust your gut with that. I'm glad I backed up as far as I did. I'm glad that I called law enforcement when I did. I'm glad that I had it in reverse, or at least in some sort of a gear to escape and evade when I did. And yeah, like we talked about earlier, just that mental repetition or that pre-planning. You go to the movie theater. Okay, if something goes sideways, whether that be fire or some sort of active attack, we are going out this door instead of that door. Just simple little things you can do with yourself or your family, whatever that might be. I truly think that is what tipped the scales in my favor, being able to recognize that, and you're not forced into that fight, flight, or freeze, you can implement whatever plan it is that you have already and just run with it.
Ooh,
You don't have to think, you can just do.
fight, flight, or freeze. I'm stealing that. I'd not heard that one before, but that's great, man. Yeah, there is a third option, which is to freeze up like a woodland creature in the headlights.
Yeah,
Interesting.
like one of those fainting goats, you just become helpless. I don't want anybody to be stuck
Yeah,
in that position.
yeah.
That bites.
I don't want to be the guy on camera going, ah.
Yeah, yeah. God forbid I tip over too.
So I want to thank you so much for coming on. What a great lesson. What a great mental rep for our listeners. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Let's talk for just a moment. Let's put this to bed once and for all. I grew up in the Maryland, D.C. area for the first 22-ish years of my life, and I didn't have In-N-Out and I didn't have Whataburger, right? That's where I come from. Spent 23
You still had your innocence.
Spent 23 years in San Diego where I had In-N-Out but not Whataburger. And now I'm in Southern Arizona where I have both. I've had Whataburger on a number of occasions. I had it when I went to basic firearms instructor school in South Texas, near Padre Island, Port Isabel area. And we stopped every day. My buddy was from Corpus Christi, and he knew about Whataburger, and he took me there, and it was wonderful. The quality control was great, and the burgers were hot and fresh and delicious. And then I went to the one in Arizona, and it was great until it wasn't. I think it's a quality control thing. But on the whole, Whataburger at its best and In-N-Out at its best are two different things. It's like Chicago and New York pizza. They're both phenomenal. They're not the same thing. We should stop comparing them. This is just my 2 cents, because they're two very different things. If you look at these burgers side by side, they're not the same thing. They're meat on a bun, and that's where the comparison ends. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Hey, you know what? I gotta give a hat tip to you and acknowledge that. There's no sense in comparing cats and dogs when they're built to be different. I'm not on the In-N-Out train yet. I don't want to dislike it. They just make it real easy. But at the end of the day,
Well, it's not In-N-Out.
I'm happy that you have.
It's their fans that are so boisterous. I think that's the problem. It's kind of like the Dallas Cowboys.
That's true. Well, I was going to say the Cleveland Browns, to be honest with you there. God bless their fans. I guess they're doing a little bit better than the average. But, hey, you know what? If that's your team, I respect that. And you've got the tenacity to stick with it thick and thin. So, I mean, that's more enthusiasm than I can pour into a burger place. So I'm here for it.
So let's recap. We have given our listeners a wonderful mental rep for an unlikely but possible scenario, and we have settled the In-N-Out versus Whataburger debate once and for all. I think our work here is done, Chris.
I think we asked the hard questions at the end, and we put that one to bed. Absolutely.
Man, I can't thank you enough for reaching out, Chris. I really appreciate it. And you've got my email. I'll shoot you my number. And if there's anything I can do, if I'm ever in Houston, I'll look you up. And if you're ever in Phoenix or Tucson, look me up, and we'll get a coffee or a meal or something, man. I'd love to see you.
Man, absolutely. It's just the offer I was going to make anytime. Houston keeps you busy, so if you're ever down this way, let me know.
Right on. All righty, gang. Welcome back to the Gutowski Files. Steven, I feel like we don't hype you up enough. I know I talk about people going over to the Reload and getting a membership to support your important work, but I feel like I need to work out like an intro, like a hype intro for you, where I'm like, Gutowski Files, and something like that. Something like that goes on. I don't know. It's just I'm new to this, so I'm working on
like
something.
Like a WWE entrance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Maybe
Sure.
we could get film of you like coming in through the crowd, surrounded by an entourage with like a boxing vest on, shadow boxing. I don't know.
This is still an audio podcast, so we can just pretend that I look like The Rock.
Yes,
people can imagine that that's how I look.
Yeah, like The Rock,
in their minds.
Only more handsome and chiseled with a beautiful, majestic beard.
Exactly.
Yes, that's accurate. All right, so this week we are discussing, by the way, we're getting seems like a lot of good news from our friends over at the Reload lately, a lot of positive news in the Second Amendment space. We have these, we had Bruin, and then we have these local, quote unquote, assault weapons bans that appear to be getting knocked down left and right, at least temporarily, by federal judges. And this week we are discussing a recent survey. You can read this article over at thereload.com. The largest ever survey of gun owners finds diversity increasing, which is awesome. Second Amendment and self-protection is for everyone: black, white, Asian, Democrat, Libertarian, Republican, gay, straight, whatever. We want you to be able to protect yourself. And the study also says that carrying is becoming more common. Carrying of defensive firearms is becoming more common, and reported over 1.6 million defensive gun uses per year. And, I'm sure, Stephen, a few of those are some guy making some stuff up saying, yeah, this guy tried to rob me, but I pointed my Glock at him and he ran away. But most of those are probably legitimate. And I'd be willing to bet there's quite a few that don't get captured, that are never reported. So that is all good news. Stephen, talk to us about this survey. Who did it and what did it tell us?
Yeah, this survey I think is particularly interesting for the audience who listens to this podcast, because they probably watch the main channel at Ask, which deals with defensive gun uses. And so here we have a survey that looks at, well, how common are defensive gun uses. Obviously, this is an ongoing debate surrounding guns. It's one of the most important ones in the firearms debate out there, because obviously it gets at the core of why someone might own a gun. Certainly, there are a lot of reasons you might own a gun. For the mechanical aspect, the sort of tinkering aspect to it, building. There's obviously the political aspect of ensuring that you are a free person who lives in a free state. That's very important to a lot of people. But your day-to-day use for firearms is generally, at the top of people's lists is self-defense. Mm-hmm. And so when you debate guns in the United States, or just generally whether or not people should own guns, it's often a balancing act between the potential downsides of gun ownership, either for individuals or at the societal level, versus the potential positive impact, right? And so, is it more dangerous to own a gun? You hear this a lot from gun control advocates who say you're more likely to be killed or kill yourself with a gun if you own one than if you don't. And so, that's a reason not to own a gun.
It's kind of like saying you're way more likely to be in a car accident if you own a car. Honestly, that's how I look at it.
Sure. But that's a common argument you'll hear, and there has actually been a significant effort to dispute how common self-defense with firearms is in the United States. You've seen some efforts towards this. You see people talk about how frequent gunshot wounds are treated in a hospital, or how many justifiable homicides there are per year, and how those numbers are in the you add those two together, you get tens of thousands, not millions. And so they'll question whether or not these stats are true. But now we have on the other side the survey-based results. And this is not a new technique, right? This is where you get the 1.6 to 2.5 million self-defense uses per year comes from surveys in the 90s. So really this debate has been kind of stagnant, like a lot of gun politics debates, for 30 years. Mm-hmm. We're still talking about the Gary Kleck surveys from the 1990s. They're very famous. But this is a brand new survey that looks at the same question again, with in a way that's addresses some of the critiques that there were for those old 90s surveys, and that obtains a representative sample in all 50 states, which is another big deal in this. So you can get a better idea from a scientific standpoint. You need, when you're getting a survey, if you only have 3 people answer you in Hawaii, and one of them says they own a gun, well, you're going to get the gun ownership rate in Hawaii is 33%.
Not exactly right? Scientific,
not a representative sample, because a lot of the older surveys will use samples that are representative on a national scale, but not on a individual state scale, right? And so this survey is really different, because it has over 16,700 gun owning respondents, which is a lot. That's way more than any of the other surveys that have been done before. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting a lot more insight on the granular state level. But it found, 25 million adults, the equivalent of 25 million American adults, have used a gun for self-defense over their lifetime. This is sort of addresses another critique of the old Kleck surveys from the 90s, that people were supposed to not only recall whether or not they had a self-defense encounter where they used a firearm, but also the time frame, because they were asked like within the last year. And that was another thing that had been critiqued. Like maybe they did remember doing, maybe they remember being involved in a self-defense incident with a gun, but it's less reliable to say whether or not it was 12 months ago or 13 months ago. And so this survey just asked whether people had ever been involved, and then used, basically the length of how old they are to calculate out the per year statistics, which come to 1.6 million. Yeah, to 1.6 million, which is a huge number, and also in line importantly, with those older surveys. It sort of gives them more credence and then updates the information that we have, which is again like 30 years old in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I was going to say I had this was what was this 1998 or 9, something like that. Took the family. I lived in San Diego. Took the family up to Disneyland. We stayed the night in the area the night before. I didn't know anything about the LA area. Ended up staying in La Mirada, which if you're from that area, you know wasn't great, but I didn't know that. Had to run out to the store to get my daughter some cough medicine at midnight because she was getting a cold. We didn't realize, and ended up almost getting carjacked in the parking lot of a Thrifties, an all night Thrifties in La Mirada, California, and had to use a gun to ward these people off. I never reported that to anyone except my employer, so I'm sure there's a ton of those out there that don't get reported at all. So if these numbers are even close to accurate, I think this is an important survey because people need to know that it isn't just. This isn't just a theoretical debate. It's not just, my rights or whatever. It really is a thing that's happening every day, and you just don't hear about it on the news unless someone actually gets shot.
Yeah, and so that's sort of the key point in all of this and how you estimate defensive gun uses, because that's the really determining factor. So in your instance, right, you used a gun, but you didn't kill anyone, right?
Right.
You didn't. Did you shoot a round?
Nope.
No. Yeah. And so that wouldn't count as a defensive gun use the way that a lot of the more recent, very low estimates go about it. So, for instance, the Gun Violence Archive, which is the one that most news outlets will cite for their mass shooting counter,
right,
which is questionable in and of itself. They use a much lighter standard. It's kind of ironic. They use a very low standard for what counts as a mass shooting, which is 4 or more people shot in a single instance, which okay, maybe fair enough. Depends on how you want to define things, but that is a much lower standard than the old standard of 4 more killed, obviously. So you're going to have a much higher number of that. But when it comes to self-defense uses, which they also track, they only track uses that are reported in media. And so they have a very low number. They have like 1,500 per year.
Right.
Because a lot of cases aren't reported by the media, because not even necessarily for bias reasons, but just because are you going to go to how to reporter find out about that incident that you described, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't.
The only way is if you went and told them.
Right, exactly.
And then even then, how newsworthy is that? Because again, these, according to surveys at least, and the typical the critique of a survey is that it's self-reported, right? So maybe people are overestimating. Because it's there's in survey work, there's this idea of that some people will respond the way that they perceive is the right response or the moral response, the good response, and so perhaps there's some effect on that. Is the claim that you'll hear from a lot of people who don't like survey-based defensive gun use estimates. Of course, in this survey, only about 31.1% of gun owners surveyed said they used a gun in self-defense, which, as you could tell, it's not a majority. So it's I don't know how much of an effect what I'm talking about here really has in practice, but they'll point to things like news reports and gunshot wound treatment at hospitals or justifiable homicides as evidence that these numbers are way too high, because these there's only tens of thousands of gunshot wound victims in a year, according to emergency room estimates. But what they leave out of that, obviously, is what survey-based estimates find to be by far the most common type of gun defense use, which is exactly the kind that you described, where no one gets shot and no one is injured. And there probably no police report is filed and no news report is done on it. And so that accounts in this survey for 81% of all defensive gun uses. And then from there, the next most common is 1 shot fired, then 2 shots fired, and so forth. So and of course, one of the interesting things is that, at least according to the professor, I had him on our podcast. If anyone's interested in listening to a lot more, in-depth discussion of
Yeah,
this
for sure.
survey, because I think it's really, really important and fascinating survey. It goes into a lot of stuff, as you mentioned at the beginning, but for the defensive gun use, I think it's really important. Professor William English, he's from Georgetown. He conducted the survey, and he says that if you look at the rate that police miss when they are involved in a shooting incident, you get, there's a couple studies out there, but it's somewhere between like 15 and 25% of shots fired actually hit the target in police shooting encounters, according to these different surveys that have been done. And so police, as much as they're not necessarily, your average police officer isn't necessarily a marksman by any means, they are probably better trained on average than the average civilian is, right? And so they probably have a little bit higher of a hit rate than a civilian in a self-defense encounter situation. And you guys have seen this obviously over at the main channel constantly. People miss a lot of shots that they take. And so if you use that miss rate of like 15% against how many estimated defensive gun uses there are per year, and how many of those are estimated to actually involve a shot being fired, you do get somewhere around the tens of thousands, which would actually match up pretty well with that emergency room data of people who have been actually hit by gunfire in a self-defense encounter. So it's interesting because that's the sort of dichotomy between these two things, is that basically one way of measuring it includes the encounters where no one is shot or even no one even fires a shot, whereas the other way of measuring it doesn't include any of that, and that's the most common outcome. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'm going on a limb here, and again, I'm allowed to speculate wildly because I'm not a journalist. I think it's probably safe to say that there's a fair number of people in the Second Amendment community, gun owner types, who, if somebody called them on the phone or sent them an email and say, "Do you want to talk to me about your guns and your gun use?" would be like, "Nope, no interest whatsoever." They have no desire to talk to the media or a pollster about their guns because they're I think in some cases correctly suspicious of those types of people. And as far as reported gun uses, I mean, I was a police officer briefly, and as a police officer, as a federal agent, and as a private citizen, I know of people personally and professionally that have been in defensive gun uses where nobody was shot, no shots were fired at all. And those things are frequently not reported to anyone, the police, the media, or to a pollster. So if anything, I think the number might even be a little on the low side, just my conjecture at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things when you're looking at surveys, right, that you could make critiques one way or the other. For instance, like you said, there is a theory that as far as people being willing to self-report gun ownership to a pollster, that might be a lower number than the actual full number of gun owners in America. That's fair. And this survey puts the estimate at in the same range that you'll see a lot of other national surveys when it comes to gun ownership in America, something around 1/3 of American adults own guns, according to this survey, which is on par with what you'll see from Gallup and Pew and some of these other national pollsters. And although in this case they were able to get 16,706, I believe, respondents who were.
Yeah, that's a crazy number. That's a crazy number.
It's a very big number for a scientific representative survey, which is very different than a drudge poll or something, where you're just going to a website and anonymously putting in a number. This is a very different process from that, which is why people generally will take this data a little more seriously than what you would get from like a Twitter poll or something, because these aren't the way they go about picking the samples is important for to get that randomized sample that's representative of the larger community. And even in that stuff, this is where you get a lot of polling controversy, like how well is the pollster's idea of demographics, how well does that match up to the reality?
How are the questions phrased?
Questions phrasing is another big issue with a lot of political polling that you'll see. But usually with like presidential polling or the upcoming midterm polling, the bigger problem that those polls have is that they have to try and guess how many people of each demographic is actually going to show up on election day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you can get pretty significant variations. And so that's, there's always going to be issues with polling that make it not perfect, but it's better than sort of anecdotal evidence in the vast majority of cases, and it's better than just kind of guessing, which I feel like is what a lot of the gun debate is based around, like individual experience and people's thoughts about how the world should work versus how it actually works.
Right.
And so, one of the really, there's other questions about it that could make these numbers exaggerated on the one hand, because one of the common critiques of the earlier surveys was that, well, people might be, for instance, they might think that something they did was in self-defense, but in fact was probably illegal.
Yeah.
I'm into this, I'm sure, at the ASP channel all the time, right? And so this is self-reported. This is what people are saying about their own experiences, not objective reality, which obviously is not really possible to get at for this sort of thing 100%. But so there's that problem. It's interesting too that it's 1.6 million, which was the lower end of those 90s surveys. That's what, if you've ever heard 2.5 million per year, that was the higher end estimate. But there's a couple reasons why this might actually be undercounting some self-defense use of guns in the United States, because one, they only asked gun owners this question. So if you don't consider yourself to be a gun owner when this pollster is asking you questions, you're not going to get asked if you ever used a gun for self-defense. So that probably cuts out a significant number of people, actually, from what Professor English was saying. He said that the 90s surveys found that like 40% of self-defense gun uses were by people who weren't gun owners or didn't consider themselves to be gun owners. So this is a situation that you'll see this a lot, because like I said a little bit earlier, about a quarter of people consider themselves to be gun owners when you look at polling. When they're asked, do you own a gun, they'll say yes. But there's significantly more people who have a gun in their home.
Mm-hmm.
You get between, that's where you get into the mid 40% of American households, of Americans say they have a gun in the home. And so the discrepancy, well, how does that make any sense, right? If only 33% of people say they own a gun, but 46% of people say they have a gun in the home, well, what is that? Well, it's probably like the wife whose husband has a gun.
I was going to say,
all kinds of things.
My wife wouldn't consider herself a gun owner, but she has access to a gun or two and knows how to use them. So yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually.
So, Professor English was saying that if you take that 40%, there's also another limitation, which is that this doesn't include anyone under the age of 18. So these are all adults in this survey, which, they're not that it's the most common thing in the world, but certainly there are examples out there, plenty of examples out there of people under 18 using guns to defend themselves as well. And so, he was saying that it's certainly, if you include those two factors, you could bump the estimate up to that 2.5 million range. That was the high range in the earlier surveys. Also, there's another factor that's probably should be considered, which is that the 90s were
a great time,
much more violent until just recently. Actually, gun murder has obviously climbed the last couple of years now to back towards those 90s rates, but for the last 30 years or so, we've had very depressed rate of gun murder in the United States, and gun violence has just been much lower than it was in the 90s. And so that's plus, so that might be another reason for the lower rate of self-defense with a gun, because technically the population is much larger now, right? So 1.6 million firearm self-defense uses per year is actually a lower rate today than it was back in the 90s, because there are more people today. But there's a couple reasons those two aforementioned reasons, and then also we've been living in a relatively less violent period of time over the last 30 years until literally just recently.
Mm-hmm.
And so that probably plays a role in how often somebody is going to have to use a gun for self-defense.
Folks, if you are lamenting the lack of down the middle, sane, sober reporting on all things gun Second Amendment related, go over to thereload.com, and consider getting a membership. Stephen relies on his members and his members only to fund his important work. Stephen, I appreciate all the good news lately. Hopefully we'll be able to keep reporting good news to our listeners. I appreciate your hard work. Keep it up, and we'll see you next week, buddy.
Certainly. We probably won't be good news forever, right?
Yeah.
It's always a mix. That's why we try to stay on top of it and be honest, with people, because you don't want to mislead anyone.
Absolutely.
Really so we'll see. It'll be we'll see. There's issues with credit card processors. Maybe we'll talk about that next week.
All right.
That's not such good news.
Fair enough. So tune in next week for some potentially bad news. Stephen, thanks again, my friend.
Yep.
Hey friends, this is John Correa. If you like the podcast, if it is bringing you value, do me a favor and leave us a rating and a review. It really helps us out.